beautiful sight. If you would please join me in silencing your cell phones. Or phones. My name is Elizabeth Dark. I'm the Associate Director of Programs for the Kenyon Review, and we are very happy to have you here for our poetry panel, although there might not just be poetry read today. The format will be slightly different than usual. We're going to have each poet read for a little bit. I'm going to introduce all of them at the same time, and then we're going to rearrange things just slightly. I'm going to remove or pull this back, and we're going to set these three chairs here to give them some time for conversation and Q&A. All right, so that's how it will go. I think everybody has found the most comfortable spot that they can. And again, I'm sorry for your inconvenience. I'm encouraged by your presence, so thank you for being here. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His poetry, essays, and criticism have been published in places like Muzzle, Vinyl, PEN American, Pitchfork, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was released in June 2016 from Button Poetry. It was named a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Book Prize and was nominated for a Hurston-Wright Legacy Award. With Big Lux, he released a limited edition chapbook, Vintage Sadness, in summer of 2017. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was released in winter 2017 by $2 Radio, located in Columbus, Ohio, and was named a Book of the Year by Buzzfeed, Esquire, NPR, Oprah Magazine, Paste, CBC, the Los Angeles Review, Pitchfork, and the Chicago Tribune, among others. His most recent book, Go Ahead in the Rain, a biography of a tribe called Quest, published in February by University of Texas Press, is a New York Times bestseller. His next book, They Don't Dance No Mo, is due out in 2020 by Random House. Eloisa Amezcua is from Arizona. She earned a BA in English from the University of San Diego, where she was the recipient of the Lindsay J. Cropper Award for Creative Writing and Poetry, selected by Ilya Kaminsky. In 2014, she completed the MFA program at Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts. She received fellowships and scholarships from the MacDowell Colony, the Fine Arts Work Center, Vermont Studio Center, the Breadloaf Translators Conference, the Vermont College of Fine Arts Postgraduate Workshop, the Minnesota Northwoods Writers Conference, and the New York State Summer Writers Institute. Eloisa's debut collection, From the Inside Quietly, is the inaugural winner of the Shelter Belt Poetry Prize, selected by Ada Limon, Shelter Belt Press, 2018. She is the author of 3 chapbooks, On Not Screaming, Symptoms of Teething, winner of the 2016 Vella Chapbook Award, and Mexit Americana, the founding editor-in-chief of The Shallow Ends, a journal of poetry, and founder of Chicago Creative. Eloisa lives in Columbus, Ohio. And finally, Emily Jungmin Yoon is author of Ordinary Misfortunes, winner of the Sunken Garden Chapbook Prize, selected by Maggie Smith. Her first full-length collection, A Cruelty Special to Our Species, is forthcoming from Echo in 2018, which we now have. I should say it's not forthcoming anymore. Born in Busan, Republic of Korea, Yoon earned her BA in English and Communication at the University of Pennsylvania, her MFA in Creative Writing at New York University, where she served as an award editor for the Washington Square Review and received a Star Works Fellowship. Her poems and translations have appeared or are forthcoming in The New Yorker, Poetry Magazine, Columbia Journal Online, Pinwheel, and elsewhere. She is the poetry editor for The Margins, the literary magazine of the Asian American Writers Workshop, and is pursuing a PhD in Korean literature in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations at the University of Chicago. In 2017, Yoon was a recipient of the Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation. So we have a lot of talent up here today. We're going to start with Hanif, and then go to Eloisa, and then Emily. So I will leave you.
Everyone's good to be back. I'm going to jump right into this because I want to get through as much of it as I can. I do want to shout out and show some solidarity to the black students on campus today. And not just on this campus, but on a lot of campuses doing the day without us. And in mind of that, I'm going to read a new thing from They Don't Dance No More, which is a book that meditates on the history of black performance in America. Al Jolson was, or is still considered, the most notable blackface performer in American history, and also an icon of American film. This is 13 ways of looking at Al Jolson. I'm going to jump around. 1. At an old piano in The Jazz Singer, his back arched, lips pushed together as if awaiting a kiss, playing the piano but looking backwards into the eyes of Eugenie Besserer, who, by that point, was 60 years old and old enough to play Jolson's mother. Jolson's suit is pristine and his hair is neat but thinning. As he plays, his eyes become their own versions of instruments, bouncing skyward in a symphony of directions before always returning to his mother, searching for his character's approval. When he finishes the first verse, he turns his body to her and asks, "Did you like that, Mama?" When she nods affirmatively, he joyously says, "I'm glad of it. I would rather please you than anybody I know of." And it bears mentioning that Jolson is white in this moment. Jolson is always white, though sometimes the whiteness is tucked underneath something else, the way whiteness can be sometimes, tucked under a coat of dark makeup, or power, or a whole entire country. But in this part of The Jazz Singer, Jolson is white, because this is the part of the movie that is supposed to be both human and tender. If Jolson is ever sympathetic, it is here, talking about how many birds will cover the sky when he achieves his dreams and can buy his mother whatever she desires, a dress to match her eyes, which, in this moment, he asks her to close so that he can steal a kiss before promising he'll give it back someday. A still of this scene was used in one of the 2 promotional posters for the film, painted carefully to capture each of Jolson's striking facial features. In the moments when Jolson's white face is on screen, obscured by nothing, dark or otherwise, I imagine what it must be like to be truly loved, regardless of what you are capable of transforming into. The Jazz Singer is entirely about this first, a young singer who runs away from his home and changes his name so he can reinvent himself, a myth unfurling into another myth and another, until all that is recognizable are the sparkling white eyes, jumping towards the heavens and falling back upon someone, anyone, willing to look into them. 2. Because I cannot take my skin off, I ask my homies for a skincare routine. And the group chat sprawls with names of products and links to them. I wander a Whole Foods and ask Safia exactly which exfoliating loofah glove I should purchase, sending photos of my findings in the group chat. Jason tells me I can't go wrong with Cetaphil as a base. All I know is that I've had the good fortune of having largely great skin for 3 decades, with no real work put into it, and I'm looking to see what might be the fullest potential for my skin's immortality. I come from an ageless people, after all. At most black functions I've been to, someone pulls me aside, points at some alleged elder, and asks me to guess how old the elder is. When I guess too young, they throw out some age bordering on the absurd, one that seems even more foolish as the sunlight gallops across an absence of wrinkles, doing a vigorous dance or a laugh that rattles the wind. I most love the mythology of the ageless blacks, how it truly does not crack unless you give yourself over to do the bidding of some evil. Like we've all been blessed, but might have to sell our souls to the devil, who will surely want his. Sorry, there's something in my eye. Bear with me. And in return, the aging process starts and accelerates. Stacey Dash didn't look a day over 25 when she was running in slow motion through the Chicago airport, trailed by Kanye West in a music video. But 1 year working for Fox News, and the people say she's looking every minute of her age. And the decade she kept at an arm's length for all that time finally returned. And Lord, did it come to collect. And all I know is I'm going to be on the wrong side of 30 soon, and I'm trying to keep my skin and my spirit clean. And so I spend way too much money on way too many products that I've never seen and don't understand. I apply my own facial mask, slathering on the white cream unevenly, too aggressively on my cheeks and forehead, my hands guided by even more anxiety than usual. And from underneath my coated eyelids, I scroll through some social media timeline or another. Black people on the internet are upset about something again. A party at some school. The theme was the hood, or some iteration of what white people think the hood is. None of the party's attendees were black, but most took measures to make themselves black. Darkness was achieved by what seemed like all those measures: shoe polish, makeup, even markers, faces sloppily colored in. The attendees wore large fake gold chains and massive white tees swung to their kneecaps. They twisted up their fingers in homage to gangs of their wildest imaginations. And what a predicament. Me, looking upon this with my face caked in some white substance which promises to keep my skin young, and boys, younger than I was in that moment, throwing whatever they could on their young skin to make it darker. Despite its history and its harm, and the many echoes of violence it summons, the thing about blackface that most clearly stung arrived in this moment, looking upon this scene of recklessly adorned white skin while taking delicate care to help my own dark skin flourish. This is what they think we look like. 3. I have had the dream where I hold Al Jolson wearing a dark coat of blackface under the water in an old bathtub in a black and white film. I don't know how I arrived in the scene, but I arrived with my hands on his shoulders, pushing him down below the water, which seems endless from my angle. In the dream, he's wearing the brown suit he wears while playing the piano in The Jazz Singer. That movie was in black and white, as is this dream, but I know the suit is brown. I know the suit is brown because I have, in my waking hours, stared at the poster from the film, which is painted in color. I know the suit is brown because on the poster, Jolson's face is not brown. The suit is the only interruption of white on his whole body. In the dream, Jolson does not struggle when I hold his head under the water. His eyes stay open. I scrub at his face with my hands until the scrubbing becomes clawing, trying to remove the layer of caked-on dark skin to address the man underneath. In the dream, I don't know what I would say to Al Jolson if I could peel the mask back from his face, but I keep peeling, and Jolson does not fight, even as I swipe fingers across his eyes which, surrounded by the darkness of his makeup, gleam from underneath the water. When I push him down far enough, his face vanishes entirely, or at least I think it does. Nothing in a dream is tactile, even in the dreams that arrive and arrive again. Only the small details remain. I know the tub is old, one of the old tubs with massive claws at its feet. In the background, a version of Blue Skies is probably playing, but in this dream, I have convinced myself that it isn't Jolson's version because it is being sung by a woman, which means I tell myself it is Ella Fitzgerald, who, I imagine, would also want me to scrub the black makeup off this white man's face. In the dream, I think I hold Jolson down because if I cannot detach him from skin that looks like my skin, I at least want his eyes to stop glowing from beneath it. But the further I push his face down into the deepest parts of the water, I am only left to search the water for my own reflection. I feel Al Jolson's suit snap itself empty, and I am not holding a body anymore. And then I wake up, and in the darkness of my real-life bedroom, I can't even see my own hands. 4. Most of the black people I knew that woman was right from the moment we heard her, stumbling her way through that interview. Can't say much for what the eyes know. There are many ways to look back black and be black, so I just can't call it. Some of my skin folks sure did, though. Some of them, the one from places that get no sun, insisted they could tell a bad tan when they saw one. The black women I knew said they knew the whole time because if she was black, no one would let her go out the house with her hair looking a mess like it was. But hey, she was the president of the NAACP, and that CP still stands for colored people last I checked. But also, it was the NAACP in Spokane, Washington. I was in Spokane, Washington once. The black people were so invisible that other people would attempt to walk straight through us. So it is tough to tell, really. But even given every benefit of the doubt in regards to aesthetics, I know the woman claiming to be black was actually not black when the interviewer asked her, "Are you actually African American?" And she said, I don't understand the question. 6. It is Black History Month and everyone is deciding now would be a good time to admit that they too once wore blackface in college, at a party, trying to dress up like a rapper or a pop star or some actor from a sitcom. It was the 80s after all, except when it was the 90s, except when it was the 2000s, except when it was last month. Some people on the internet know blackface is bad but don't seem to be entirely sure why. It's just one of those things white people shouldn't do. I wonder about the benefits and failures of this, how far the country has gotten laying down the framework for societal do's and don'ts while not confronting history. If it is possible to ground a true behavioral shift without attacking the root of blackface, the fact that there will actually always be an audience wanting a blackface but not necessarily a black person. The problem with approaching history in America is that too many people measure things by distance and not by impact. When I die, Al Jolson once said, I'll be forgotten. On a stage at a press conference with his wife, the politician who put on blackface to dress as Michael Jackson in the 80s fields a question about whether or not he can moonwalk. He insists he can, and then turns to his wife, who tells him that now is not an appropriate time to break out the old dance move, but despite the absurdity of it all, I find myself wanting to see him do it. 8. I have never seen Al Jolson cry while singing the song Mammy. But black jazz composer Noble Sissel says there was no sight like it. What Jolson had that went away in the eras after his was the palpable and physical presence of passion, before being cool was sold. Sissel says Al Jolson cried while singing Mammy, and it was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. A single tear rolling slowly down Jolson's face while crooning the old lyrics about black servitude, a woman who leaves her family to care for someone else's. The tear streaking through Jolson's black makeup and creating a clear border, who Jolson was and who he was dreaming himself to be. 9. What do you have to say about the people who do not have the option for removal but still choose to love themselves anyway? What about the removal of people who choose to love themselves? What about love anyway? What about the removal of people who do not have the option? What about the love of people who choose removal? What about the still people who do not have options to love? What do you have to say about removal? What do you have to say about options? What about the people removed? 12. At the Halloween party, and at the frat party, and once on High Street spilling out of some bar after a football game or a basketball game, and at the work party, and one time among the good liberals of the Northeast during a trip to the theater which clashed with some kind of college outing, and the streets turned into some shouting match between a black person and a person who was only black that night, and the temporary black yelled, "I'm just trying to honor," and then I heard nothing else. And oh, I can't forget the time at the poetry open mic where the white reader read a poem about how they sometimes wanted to be black, and every time they said the word black, they ran their fingers across their face. And I guess the whole thing about being a tourist within a culture is that you can take whatever benefits you most for a few hours. And oh yeah, the toga party on Hudson that one year was pretty wicked, I guess. And I think there is a point where desire intersects with impulse, and that is where I want to meet you, person who is perhaps right now painting your face with a color that is not your color. And I must know what parts of the people I love you want. And I feel like this isn't just about skin anymore. It isn't. We could talk all day about what skin affords and doesn't afford, and so I feel like this is about that which rests outside of the grasp but can become clearer for a night. And what I am really asking is about how lonely all of you are. And how many selves might one need to fill that loneliness? And listen, I have been consumed by the best parts of my ghost some nights, and those are the nights I don't want to end. And I want you to hear clearly what I am saying. And what I am saying is that it is possible to hate a person so much that you want to consume every part of them. 13. It ends the way it begins. Al Jolson's face contorting in the way his eyes widen while he sings songs. Historians say that if you watch a young Jackie Wilson, you can see that he was influenced by Jolson, and I suppose it's true, the way his lips pushed out even when the long note has faded. Jolson's very first film, before the jazz singer made him a star, was a 10-minute short called A Plantation Act. It was a sound-on-disc short film set on a sparse plantation background. Jolson in a tattered rag of a shirt covered by striped overalls is painted black, his arms and face covered. He sings 3 happy tunes. It is not particularly memorable to most fans of Jolson, who had come to believe that The Jazz Singer was his first film. The story behind it was that technicians had to surgically repair the soundtrack disc to get it to play with the movie. None of the songs sung in A Plantation Act were by black singers or sung in an attempt to get black singers to the forefront of the cultural consciousness. And after a while, Jolson's white face can become his black face. Later in his career, it's almost as if he couldn't separate his white facial theatrics from his black ones. And in the shadows of black and white films, after seeing him in blackface, a viewer might have to look closely at the white Jolson to make sure he'd gotten all of it off. The same way a viewer might have to look closely at the black performers who came directly after him to see the ways he inspired their looks or their energy. And I suppose that's what people are not looking for when they look at Al Jolson, his foolish and flawed pursuit of complete immersion until every line was blurred, until he maybe got back to the silence of his home, looked himself in the mirror, and put all of the makeup back on. Thanks.
So we had lunch with some students earlier, some KR associates, and we were talking about what it means to be a writer and like the writing life, and how so much of that is romanticized when being a writer means just like living, right? Just like doing everyday things. And so I'm gonna read a few poems that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't just like living my life, which includes like watching TV, you know, and like listening to podcasts. Defenestration. Have I told you about cats falling from windows? How the lower the window, the more damage to the body. The more room they have to fall, the more they can catch themselves on the way down. And who hasn't fallen in love and wished to swing their head, arch their back, splay legs like wings, and land on their feet? I fell once from an airplane on purpose. I didn't love the man strapped to my back, but for a moment I might have. He asked if I was all right when I fell silent as we tumbled toward Earth like a comet. I was excited, I swear. It's just that I had already fallen, and I knew the difference between falling out of control and falling into it. Love, I turn to you on nights so purple, so dark as my muscles loosen and hands uncurl, because I don't know the difference between what will happen and why it happens. Still, we fall asleep and there is no more falling, just me and you in this first floor catless apartment. Watching Underworld Inc. Episode 3, Human Cargo. The Pima County Morgue, approximately 110 miles from my childhood home, houses John Doe, Jane Doe, sexless Doe, dated remains found in the Sonoran Desert, nameless and alone. The medical examiner holds a fragmented cranium, points to where the eyes would go. I cross the border on foot. My father waits for me in the McDonald's parking lot 1 block into America. I stand in the line labeled Ciudadanos. Francisco, a people smuggler in Nogales, says his secret is training others to hide and survive. I don't remember much from middle school U.S. history. Who led the troops that took Fort Ticonderoga, or who forced General Pemberton to surrender in 1863. But I remember, like yesterday, the sound of my mother's voice practicing the Pledge of Allegiance before her naturalization ceremony. A Border Patrol agent explains how after 5 days on foot in the desert, skin begins to split from the burning sun. Flesh exposed and open. Nothing can be done once the breaking has started. Gratitude is a word that comes to mind. In Phoenix, Magdalena buys and sells moneyless migrants wholesale, their families unable to pay off cartel trafficking rates. 3 women girls sit one room over, faces hidden with pillowcases, their background. And Magdalena, she talks a tough talk, says business is business and business is good, her face concealed by a black bandana and mirrored sunglasses reflecting the camera back into itself. When the show's over, I'll call my mother just to hear the sound of her voice. ¿Cómo estás? She'll ask, and I'll lie. Tell her things are fine the way she'd say the same to her mother 30 years before, when she moved to this country alone with her husband. I'm haunted by that for her. I moved thousands of miles away, alone, just to feel closer. Before we hang up, she'll say, Dios te bendiga. Picture me signing myself or kissing a crucifix I can't bring myself to wear. A blessing I don't need, but I'll take it anyways. How's everyone doing today? Sorry, I needed to buy time to drink some water. Teaching my mother English over the phone. I try to explain the difference between pant and pants, why the former isn't simply one pair, but what the lungs do with fear or excitement, why clothe isn't a singular noun, but what most do to the body each morning. She calls on a Wednesday, needs help with an assignment for her 3rd English beginners course where she meets twice a week. Her classmates from countries with names beautiful as hers. I try to make the language clear to my mother, as she one day, before my English took hold, explained to me that I did not, in fact, make friends with a girl named Sorry. But we were on the playground and she hit me, fue accidente, y me dijo, I'm sorry, and when someone says I am, yo soy, that's not how this works, I remind her, when she asks if the plural of dust is dusts. She asks me to conjugate love. I love, you love, he loves, she loved, we have loved, I am loving. She wants to know how a word can be both a thing and an action, like war and mistake. Although I can't put into words in Spanish how I know the difference, so I tell her I have to go, and I go, and she goes, and I haven't taught her anything. So I'll read some newer poems, and then let Emily read because that's why you're here. Just a quick content warning, there's a little bit of like graphic violence. I haven't masturbated in 5 days for fear of crying. That's not the violent part. I haven't masturbated in 5 days for fear of crying. The fresh paint on my nails makes it look like there are small galaxies in them. Even in the dark, I've lived through 9 of the 10 hottest days in Phoenix. I missed the 10th by less than 2 months, but only because I didn't exist yet in this world, not fully. Scientifically, from one's perspective in a rear-view mirror, there's no difference in the way someone looks when talking over Bluetooth and the way they look when talking to themselves, but then again, I'm no scientist. Not technically. Technically, I'm in Arizona. Technically, I'm in Arizona and should be asleep, but technically, you are on my mind again. And I'm not just repeating myself on accident. The first time we had sex, I made love like a butcher bird. I scavenged my carcass clean for an offering from inside of myself. And I think you liked it. And I think there's a difference between making peace and avoiding war with oneself, which is why I'd like to believe in something enough to pray for it with my whole body. Like that you are the sun and I, the desert, drunk on you, staggering through the dark until daylight.
And here I am talking about distance again, in a room rented near a strip mall that I visit regularly. We joke about my suburbanism, my obsession with wholesale-priced hot dogs, and the infinite shades of beige we swim in when we move through the city. Together is a word that means nothing when you are gone, is a word that means both unified and free of emotional difficulties, as in when we are together, I am together. Together comes from a Proto-Germanic word I can't pronounce that means in a body. And I suppose you are in my body tonight because you are on my mind again. And I'm not just repeating myself on accident. Look, 509 people have been killed in mass shootings since our first kiss, and it's only November. And I watch a video of a girl, 16, maybe 17. She describes how she hid under her schoolmate's body. He'd been shot. He was dead. There were pieces of him in her hair, on her dress. Together, she made it out of school that day alive. And the police took her as evidence, as witness. And sometimes I'm afraid to go out in public. And I could go on about the way you hold me with your whole body when the news is bad, and the news is mostly bad these days. And I could go on about the way you say my name slowly when the weather is hot, and people die of this heat too. And I could go on about the smell of your skin, how it lingers on my hands, and I refuse to touch anything for hours. And I could go on about silence. And I could go on about outer space. And I could go on about reaching and hunger and fear, and I could go on, and I could. This poem has the same title because I recently wrote a bunch of poems with the same title, perhaps because I'm a lazy writer. I haven't masturbated in 5 days for fear of crying. Because we know distance too well. Because the blood bank didn't have enough blood for Nana and her new knee. Because I see your car, no, a car like yours parked across the street from my apartment. Because the same night awaits us all. Because Arizona and the drought, and I was 7 when it started. Because Nana used to sleep with a belt tied around her waist so tight to wake like an hourglass. Because I wait on you. Because I want to know the antonym to every word. Because we speak to each other in our sleep. Because I do my best thinking in the shower, so I take long showers. Because you kiss the parts of my body I hate most. Because you can love someone and not remember their birthday. Because sometimes I want the wind and it is impossible. Because from the airplane I could see both oceans and where they met.
Wow. To follow these people. So hi, I'm Emily. This is my first time in Ohio. Very happy to be here. Thank you for coming. So as I was listening to Eloisa's last 2 poems, I was reminded of one of my poems in the book, which is also about tenderness, love, also heartbreak, and heat. So I usually read this at the end because I start with sad poems and I want to end with something kind of tender, but I think I'll start with this. It's called Time in Wales. Our legs of yellow skin next to one another, calves spread, I think of beached whales, the arcs of their bellies, clean and gleaming. A whale would lie in the shape of something cold, the body sipping on itself like a drain. Gravity sucks a whole whale onto sand. You study Korean, whispering, "무르르다, 무르르다," meaning literally, water rises. but really meaning to improve or to rise and sap in springtime trees. Come spring, it will be your birthday. We will have seaweed soup, supply our blood with oxygen. Do you know that Koreans do that because hundreds of years past they saw whales eating seaweed after giving birth? You cross your legs, their hair black and coarse, like my father's and my grandfather's across the ocean. And do you know that whales have hair, perhaps a sign of their past when they walk the earth? Summer of years past, your father across the same ocean to bring you to America, where you would grow up speaking a language different from mine. Do you know that whales too detect where one another comes from through song? That music that I hear is yours and ours. Murorida, murorida. Water rises, whales die in this year's hot winter. Your father has told you of the summer, the dank heat. Your foster mother ran after you, you already asleep in your father's arms, wailing your name. You will not be called by that name the next day, and years will pass by. But when you're 10, you will write about that story and spell whale as the animal whose breath is a distance, spouting steam, the great animal that becomes crushed by air and sprayed with words, man's fault. And yes, so perhaps the world will end in water, taking with it all loving things. And yes, in grace, only song, only buoyancy. You rise now, whispering, murolida, murolida, meaning, literally, to raise water, but really meaning to bring water to a boil. So I wrote that poem thinking I'm going to write a love poem. And then I started thinking about global warming. I'm always thinking about global warming and whales. Switching gears a little bit. I want to read a poem about my grandmother. An ordinary misfortune. What is pressing? What is pressed? Or who? My grandmother, a woman, a teen. Her father presses the gate shut, presses her into a crate, the crate into a shed. She unfolds by morning, binds her chest. She walks on woman. An American soldier sees her and yells, "Stop over there," in Japanese, the language they both learn. When she runs, she's unmistakably woman. She falls. He laughs. What is a body in a stolen country? Or whose? What is right in war? What is left in war? War hasn't left Korea. I have. I fold. I give up myself to you. Which one of you said, "Let's have raunchy Korean sex"? To me. Which one of you didn't? Do you represent America to me? Did those soldiers to her? We didn't fear war. We feared the Allies, she said. So that poem is important to me, especially because I think if you know anything about the Korean War, what you know is probably the history of Seoul. And my family is from the southernmost tip of Korea, in Busan and the surrounding cities. And that's where all the refugees fled. And so their history is very different from the stories of, battles and guns, the very masculine narratives of war. So I think that it's really important to preserve these other stories about the Korean War. And also about how the American soldiers were a source of fear, even though they were supposed to be the allies of South Korea. Switching gears again a little bit, the next poem is called "Hello, Miss Pretty Bitch." You'll get it. Hello, Miss Pretty Bitch. The street drummer calls out in Korean, no doubt thinking it a compliment, a pleasant surprise cinched with red ribbons for Christmas, the day select theaters will gift us with The Interview, the comedy in which two American journalists ignite Kim Jong-un's face. Freedom has prevailed, the film star Seth Rogen says about the release. The same was thought at the time of Korea's release from the Japanese Empire, though then the Korean War began, and compared to war, what's so bad about a movie? Anyway, even war can be funny, and now a drummer in New York says, you got a smile that could light up the whole town. Though I'm not smiling, thinking about villages and cities, of what became North Korea set on fire, sending puddles of twilight into sunless skies, as if flames could stab, but its freedom of speech prevails. Freedom always prevails, which is why we get to see two Americans incinerate a Korean face on Christmas, hold our popcorn and chocolate bars, and laugh as the dictator explodes in tune to a pop song. Laugh as American soldiers would laugh at Korean children chanting, hello, hello, give me chocolate with wartime hunger. Laugh as they choose which face to light up. So, that was 3 poems. I'm going to read 3 more poems. I'm going to read a section from the poem sequence that I have in here called Testimonies. Do you all know what the term comfort woman means? Most of you. Yeah, it's a euphemistic term for the sex slaves of the Japanese Empire. So each section is told in the voice of a different comfort woman. So I'll read one of those. Testimony. Park Kyung-soon. There was a man about 45 years of age with a mustache who told me to work for Japan and meet my brother in Hiroshima. The man said my refusal might not be good for my parents. The man and his men took me to Shimonoseki. I was led into a room. I was told to take a bath. I was told to take off my clothes. I only begged that I meet my brother. When they finally took me to Hiroshima, my brother was alone in a big empty room. He asked if I came as a comfort woman, and I promised I would return to see him again. When flower buds were about to appear, I was taken to Osaka. In its room, I was number 10. I was then a comfort woman. I became so sick with syphilis, I could not walk. One night, an officer came and told me to get ready. I was in such great pain. The next thing I remember is arriving in Seoul. It was June 1945. Immediately, I had a miscarriage. The mustached man learned of my return, told me to return to the comfort station. To avoid the draft again, I got married. Our new life, a rented room. I could smell the odor of my weekly number 606, arsenic for syphilis. My baby discharged pus from his ears, was called crazy. My brother returned home with burns and lumps all over his body from radiation, discharged disintegrated bone the size of teeth near his wounds. The Japanese soldiers discharge out of charge into every room. I didn't choose what I'm going to read, so I'm like winging it, but I think, I want to read Bell Theory. One of the greatest hits. So, Bell Theory. When I was laughed at for my clumsy English, I touched my throat, which said ear, when my ear said year, and year after year I pronounced the new thing wrong and other throats laughed. Elevator, library, vibrating bells in their mouths. How to say azalea, how to say forsythia. Say instead golden bells, say I'm in ESL. In French class, a boy whose last name is Kring called me Belle, called me by my Korean name, pronouncing it wrong, called it loudly, called attention to my alien. I touched the globe moving in my throat, a hemisphere sinking. Called me across the field lined with golden bells. I wanted to run and be loved at the same time. By Kring, as in ring of people. Where are you going? We're laughing with you. The bell in our throat that rings with laughter is called uvula. From uva, grape. A theory special to our species this great veil has to do with speech, which separates us from animals. Kring looked at me and said, "Just curious, do you eat dogs?" And I wanted to end my small life. Be reborn a golden retriever of North America. Lie on a field lined with golden bells, loved. Today, in a country where dogs are more cherished than a foreign child, an Oregon Senate candidate says no to refugees, says years ago, Vietnamese refugees ate dogs, harvested other people's pets. Harvest as in harvest grapes, harvest as in harvest a field of golden rice, as do people from rice countries, as in people eat dog worlds. Years ago, 1923, Japan, the phrase jugoen gojitsen is used to set apart Koreans, say 15 yen, 50 sen, the colonized who used the chaos of the Kanto earthquake to poison waters, set fire, a cruelty special to our species, a cruelty special to our species, how to say jugo, how to say goji, how jugo sounds like die in Korean, how gojit sounds like lie, 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 library, azalea, library. I'm going to the library. I lied years ago on a field lined with forsythia. Okay, I said I want to end with something kind of empowering. So here it is. Stay hydrated. All right. Say grace. In my country, our shamans were women, and our gods multiple until white people brought an ecstasy of rosaries, and our cities today glow with crosses like graveyards. As a child in Sunday school, I was told I'd go to hell if I didn't believe in God. Our teacher was a woman whose daughters wanted to be nuns, and I asked, "What about babies? And what about Buddha?" And she said, "They're in hell too." And so I memorized prayers and recited them in front of women I did not believe in. Deliver us from evil. O sweet Virgin Mary, amen. O sweet, O sweet. In this country, which calls itself Christian, what is sweeter than hearing, "Have mercy on us," from those who serve different gods? O clement, O loving, O God, amidst ruins, amidst waters, fleeing, fleeing. Deliver us from evil, O sweet, O sweet. In this country, point at the moon, at the stars, point at the way the lake lies, with a handful of feathers, and they will look at the feathers and kill you for it. If a word for religion they don't believe in is magic, so be it. Let us have magic. Let us have our own mothers and scarves, our spirits, our shamans, and our sacred books. Let us keep our stars to ourselves, and we shall pray to no one. Let us eat what makes us holy. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So I've told them that you all are phenomenal at asking questions, and we know they're phenomenal at answering them. So let's start.
Do you guys prefer to handwrite your poems when you first write them, or type them?
Oh, I type. Yeah. I can't even read my own handwriting.
I type. I just don't. I don't know. Handwriting just takes a long time. I also like edit as I go, and it's hard to do that when handwriting. So I like to type things out.
Yeah, ditto. I like to edit as I write, and writing it out by hand would take too long, and also wasted resources in my case. So, yeah.
This question is for Hanif. So I'm in an intro poetry class,
Yeah.
and we read your book for today, and our class was wondering, like, why you choose to kind of write in, like, the block text. Is it more because, like, do you intend for your poetry to be, like, narrative, or, like, we were kind of agreeing that maybe it was supposed to be like read out loud, like spoken word.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking about both writing and editing as a sonic practice and not just a visual practice, because I think the work, one, I came up in slam and some in performance poetry, and I'm not that interested in detangling myself from that tradition, and so to me the work has to stand in the air as it does on the page, and there are some of the reasons why writing block text have to do with my desire to figure out line breaks, which I still have not. But some of that too is about pace and how I desire the poems to be read, right? I like to think, particularly in that book, in my new book it's much different, but in that book I was thinking about how to transfer feelings of urgency and claustrophobia. And I think nothing does that for me like seeing a block of text, particularly with no punctuation, that doesn't give a reader an exit of a period or a comma. And so that's kind of where my brain is at.
This is also for Hanif. In They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, you use the Marvin Gaye performing at the All-Star game as like throughout the book. I was just wondering if did that come first, or was that kind of something that you stumbled upon?
It didn't come first. It came in the middle. So that piece is like a whole piece that lives online somewhere. Though now I feel like Anthony Hamilton singing the national anthem at the All-Star game was equal to the great Marvin Gaye performance. But it came in the middle. We decided to break it up, and I positioned it that way because my greatest fascination, I think, with that Marvin Gaye performance at the All-Star game with the national anthem is that his interest seemed to be in taking this piece of American iconography and breaking it up to suit his own interests, right? To, within an America, create a newer, better America. And I think my desire for that book was to present new ways of looking at the country for both myself and for the people I care about, right? And I think that Marvin Gaye was offering a small window into that with his attempt at reframing and restructuring the national anthem into like a R&B ballad.
So we heard a lot of poems that were about very, very serious topics, and I'm just kind of wondering, how do you find a way to enter into that a serious topic through writing? Like, how is it not like so overwhelmingly big and overwhelmingly sad that you're able to put it into a piece of work?
You go.
I think for me it's first recognizing that those serious things unfortunately have become very ordinary, and so it is not difficult now for me to enter a mass shooting because it happens so often that like I can't escape it on a monthly basis these days, and that's horrible, but it's also a reality, and so it is, and Emily and I were talking about this earlier, and remembering that these big and serious things that are happening in society or in history that have happened have like individuals behind them, and individual people who are affected by them, either people we know or people we don't know, and so I think it is in making it and like first reckoning with the fact that it is ordinary, and it isn't a big serious thing that has no effect on my life on a day-to-day basis. I can't but write about that stuff,
Yeah, I feel like writing about an issue helps me process it and also understand it better. And I try to keep in mind what the poet Jericho Brown said to our class when I was in a workshop with him once, and he said to be your ultra self, which sounds like very abstract. I mean, it is, but basically kind of transcend, what like yourself and see what like this braver version or better version of you say in the next line. And so I try to keep that in mind. And after going through a difficult topic in a poem that way, I kind of figure out how I'm feeling about something, or I figure out how I'm going to, I guess, treat the matter or go about my life kind of talking about it. So definitely for me, I think just writing about it helps me organize my thoughts, and also helps me decide how I'm going to continue talking about it and sustain the discourse. So yeah, I think that's how I view my writing.
Yeah, this question's for Emily, but I think everyone could answer it. In your author's note, you say that you want to amplify and speak the stories of the comfort women without speaking for them. And I was wondering what your method was for dealing with that balance.
Well, so I wrote that thinking, how do I think about persona poems? Because I have a lot in my book. And I think that that's like a way of reminding myself that I need to ask these questions, like where is this poem coming from? Is this coming from empathy or from selfish reasons? And who is benefiting from me writing this poem? And that kind of helps me not take over other people's voices in my writing. So when I was writing the personal poems for this book, I was careful not to like insert my own like experiences or feelings into them. Even though obviously some interpretation and like reordering of anecdotes have to happen to put it into poetic form. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I should ever pretend like I understand like these people's experiences like 100%, right? I think I should do my role of like spreading their stories and like raising awareness about them, but I don't ever want to say I know everything about them, everything that happened. And I feel like I need to always feel uncomfortable. And I think it's a very necessary discomfort. And I hope I never lose that, really.
So it's award season, and there always seems to be some kind of discourse around the validity of awards. Drake had like a little speech where he talked about how the Grammy that he was holding as he just won, it didn't matter that much. Green Book just won, and people were very upset about like the process of who gets to win and who doesn't. So I guess my question for you guys is, after you've put out a work and it's being recognized or not being recognized, how do you find a balance in how much you care about what other people think and how they are receiving your works and how much you put into it?
Happy Green Book won because that means racism's over. At first I was like, oh, it's weird that this movie that I hate won, but then I was like, oh, cool. Racism's done.
I think it's just like, who are you writing for? Are you writing for an award committee? Because that writing is going to look totally different than if you're writing for your mom, or if you're writing for a community of people that, you know, your work speaks to. And so I hope to never write towards an award committee, because that is like, that is so limiting, both for you and for the reader. So yeah.
I feel like it's the same with listicles.
Yeah.
Like all the greatest
Yeah.
books of whatever year. I feel like it's kind of like a map in which, if you look at the timeline of awards, you see every year who won, right? But a map is always like not where everything is. It's also like showing what's excluded, right? So I like reading books that haven't like won the same acknowledgments, but that I like fell in love with. You know, I think that there are so many books obviously out there because only there are so few people who can win awards, and I really want to echo what Eloisa said. The award committees are also usually not people that maybe might agree with the kind of writing that you're doing. So yeah, and I found that when my community responds well to my writing, that's what gives me most happiness, rather than like getting like a review from, you know, the New York Times, which are also great, but I know who I'm writing